evening, and thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and this is Arroyo Live. This program is produced by and through the facilities of Pasadena Media. Created to help inform and restore a sense of connection for those feeling isolated by the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the continued hope of this program to help bring together and strengthen our community through informative and meaningful conversation. To that end, this program is live if you are watching on Tuesday, August 11th, and there will be an opportunity for you to comment with questions later on in the program. You can submit your comments anytime via email to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. Tonight, we look at the effects of COVID-19 on recent local city politics. For this discussion, I'm joined by Mr. Larry Wilson, former editor of the Pasadena Star News and current public editor for the San Gabriel Valley newspapers, and Mr. Justin Chapman, journalist for Pasadena Now, and the host of Well Read with Justin Chapman, a program that runs right here on the Arroyo channel. Thank you both for joining me this evening, gentlemen. I'd like to ask each of you to please take a moment to tell our viewers at home a little more about yourself. And Larry, let's begin with you.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to see you there, sitting in the City Hall courtyard. Pasadena Media is what we used to call the company that owned Pasadena Weekly. When we started the weekly 37 maybe years ago now, that's what Pierce O'Donnell and Rick Cole called. We had two papers. We had the weekly and we had 9 to 9. Anyway, fun to be back on Pasadena Media. I grew up here and I went to school here at Elliott and Muir and Blair, and came back to town after living in New York City, where I was working at Rolling Stone Press, because they asked me to be the business manager of Pasadena Weekly. It's been 33 years this summer that I've been at the Star News, first as the editorial page editor, then as the editor for 12 years of the paper, and then as the public editor of these papers, the other papers, the Whittier Daily News and the San Gabriel Valley Tribune. And now I'm on the editorial board of 11 papers, every paper that isn't the Times in Southern California, every daily. But I still work here in Pasadena, and I'm really at the Pasadena Star News as my base. Not that I go into the office, right here at home in Linda Vista. So it's a pleasure to be with you all, and pleasure to see Justin over there, my good friend.
Well, certainly the life of a newsman, and again, we thank you very much for joining us. And Justin, if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments to tell our viewers a little about you as well, please.
Sure, yeah, Justin Chapman, longtime Pasadena resident. I've been a journalist in the city for over 15 years, most of that at the Pasadena Weekly. Larry, I don't know if you saw this article I did last year that I went into the Altadena Historical Society archives and connected the Pasadena Weekly from the Pasadena Media Company that you were a part of to older Altadena papers that dated all the way back to 1929.
Yeah, I did. And I used to deliver the Altadenan when I was a kid. And that was where our first offices were, up there. And they had the hot lead type in the back room.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Where they printed the Altadenan on, yeah.
Cool, yeah, and also write for Pasadena Now and other publications as well. I was the youngest elected member of the Altadena Town Council back in 2005, and founded and chaired its education committee for a couple of years. And then I went up to Berkeley, where I got my undergraduate degree, came back here, got my master's degree at USC in public diplomacy, and now I work as the communications officer at the Pacific Council on International Policy, which is like a nonprofit independent think tank affiliated with USC Annenberg.
Clearly, it sounds that you are very busy most of the time yourself. So we do thank you for taking a little time out of your busy schedule to be with us here this evening as well. And before we get into the main topic of discussion, I would like to ask, we certainly see in the media every day that the COVID situation is not de-escalating. In fact, there for many weeks were reports of an ever increasing number of cases, both in hospitalizations as well as simply people coming down or testing positive with COVID. So, what I would like to ask each of you to take a moment to talk about perhaps is how COVID has affected each of you on a more personal level. Have either of you gentlemen had or know people that have had brushes with COVID since the onset of the pandemic? Justin, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to put you on the hot spot and we'll have you go first this time.
Sure. I've been very fortunate to be able to work at home this whole time, and that will be the case until this is resolved, presumably. And there have been some small financial hits with a small merit-based raise not coming through, but nothing really substantial. So I'm very fortunate and grateful for that. But I certainly know people who have been impacted, far more financially than I have, lost their jobs, are now in unemployment, including in the media outlets in Pasadena. It's been pretty devastating to see. And also people being evicted. I know personally people who are going through that as well. It's definitely hit home in terms of the people I know and what they're going through, and it's hit every community. It's really scary to see it unfolding.
And Larry, how about your take on this?
I just want a microphone like Justin's. So cool looking. It's our papers, the 11 papers of the Southern California News Group have gotten so small and tight as far as personnel goes that I'm lucky I haven't been furloughed. A lot of my colleagues and colleagues at the LA Times are dealing with furloughs, meaning 1 day a week off, meaning 1/5 of your pay gone. But our editorial board is so small in terms of full-time people for the 11 papers, i.e. small as 2 people, my boss and me. And nominally the publisher of our papers is on the editorial board and the executive editor of all our papers. But the people who do the day-to-day work, that's 2 of us. So we can't be furloughed because then the pages wouldn't come out. And so I've been lucky in that sense. I've been working at home off and on for several years. Going into the office, I used to basically just go into the office for editorial board meetings if we met with politicians or something. So I'm comfortable working at home here in Linda Vista. And that's what I've been doing. Our best friends who come down with the disease are overseas, people we know in France. I don't know that many people here in Pasadena. I know a few acquaintances around the state who have tested positive, but we've been lucky, and middle-class people are often lucky when it comes to COVID, and people who don't have relatives who are in nursing homes along Fair Oaks Avenue, where the great brunt of Pasadena cases have been. So no, there's been some good things. There's some quiet things. There's some wonderfully peaceful things about not having to go to parties, not having to go to the movies, not having to go out to dinner, all those onerous things. You can just concentrate on your work, and I write a lot, and I edit a lot, and I'm very lucky that that's my profession. I can do it here pretty well.
Well, in recent weeks, certainly we have seen that COVID and the continuing pandemic has affected a great many things across the nation. Of course, one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now is that children are about to start going back to school. And there has been a great deal of controversy about whether or not the school should be reopened or whether distance learning is the way to go. We have seen a lot of sporting events canceled. We've seen some sporting events trying to get back on track. with mixed results. And in fact, most recently, news is now breaking that the Pac-10 conference and the Big 12 are probably going to be, perhaps canceled is a harsh word, but at least postponed. So,
Right. So does that mean we have the Rose Bowl in March, or April? There is talk of trying to have a football NCAA football season in the spring. So that would be fascinating. It'd be a lot warmer down in the bowl, down right down in the Arroyo here, if it were not January 1st. I'm all for it.
well, so we have seen certainly that there are a great many far-reaching effects from this continuing pandemic, and discussions continue that it's very likely we will not see uh, a realistic vaccine before the beginning of next year. And on top of that, we have an election coming up in November. But let's talk local for a minute. What is the state of local politics here in Pasadena, in perhaps in the greater Los Angeles area? How has COVID affected all of that?
Well, let me jump in here first because the most important person affected by this locally, and we don't need to talk about LA, let's talk about Pasadena. Poor Victor Gordo, trying to campaign for mayor from his Joe Biden-esque bunker. No, I mean, the mayor, Terry Tornick, also. But the mayor already has the bully pulpit of being mayor, just like the governor, just like the president. So, but Victor, who's a city councilman here for viewers, they know that, who's running against an incumbent, never easy. No matter what the issues are, it's never easy. But he can't be out there pressing the flesh. He can't be out there ringing doorbells all around the city. And you know that he would be, as the mayor, as Terry would be as well. But who wants to see a politician walking down the driveway and knocking on the door? And that's how people win office in Pasadena. It really is. The mayor walked every neighborhood. Victor would be out there when he won 4 years ago. The councilman, Victor, would be out there. And how can you campaign in an atmosphere like this? It's crazy. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, and I mean, Victor had the majority of the votes, I believe, in the primary, and so it's going to be
plurality. Yeah, he had more than the mayor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be very interesting to see how the numbers are get impacted by the pandemic. Yeah, I'm sure we won't see any. Well, obviously, we won't see any in-person physical candidate forums. Hopefully, there'll be some virtual forums. I haven't heard of any, but I might have to organize one myself. I organized the West Pasadena Residents Association's mayoral and District 6 City Council forum back in January. Certainly, Pasadena residents should hear from Gordo and Tornick this fall. And so I hope to see something like that set up where people can hear directly from them because it's an important election. Other things have been impacted too. I'm sure police oversight would have been implemented sooner potentially because pressure would have been put on council in person, whereas now it's a little bit removed and is taking a little bit longer. Although maybe the protest wouldn't have been as pronounced if it weren't for the dramatic impact of the pandemic. So it's hard to say.
Well, you mentioned the upcoming mayoral elections here in Pasadena, and as I referenced earlier, we also have the presidential election that is coming up in November. Does this situation of an inability to launch a full-fledged campaign, does it set the stage for elections to be contested? Is that likely something we're going to see? Certainly, there's been a lot of speculation at the presidential level that we're going to see whatever, regardless of the outcome, that we're going to see the opponent contest the results. Is that likely to happen here in Pasadena as well?
I doubt it. I think that I don't see Tornick or Gordo blaming mail-in ballots, for example, as a reason to contest the results of the election. Certainly, we're going to see that on the federal level. But I don't know. What do you think, Larry? Do you see that kind of outcome happening down here?
No, I don't. But I do think it's really too bad for those citizens that we're not seeing them engage. And there were some good debates in the primary. We got to see them together with other candidates. But this is what it comes down to. I mean, these are, two extremely bright, capable Pasadenans, one much younger than the other, vying for the mayoral post. And the people, the chief executives, the mayors, the presidents, the governors, do have it all over. Let's say we could consider the council kind of as like Pasadena's legislature, and the mayor is sort of like the governor or the president. During times of health crisis like this, it's the mayor who gets all the ink and all the airtime. And I think we might go on and talk about the experience of trying to watch a city council meeting. You're just seeing 3 of us on the screen here, but when you've got 8 of them on the screen in a Pasadena City Council meeting, they can be excruciating enough live with all 8 of them sitting in the room. To have the Zoom panels, it hasn't gone particularly well. Do you think, Justin?
No, I think there's been some challenges. There's been fewer meetings. When you're not able to be there in person, and fewer commission meetings and things like that, my sense is that not to anybody's fault necessarily, but that there's less transparency in the process right now. But also speaking of the connection with the presidential election and the city election, Joe Biden's pick today for VP, Kamala Harris, if they win, then it would open up the Senate seat in California. And then if, for example, Gavin Newsom picked Adam Schiff to replace her, or Joe Biden picked Adam Schiff as his attorney general, then someone like Steve Madison could run for Adam Schiff's seat in Congress, and then that would open up his District 6 city council seat, which would be hotly contested. So it would be really interesting to see how Joe Biden's decision today sort of has these ripple effects that go down all the way down to Pasadena.
Wouldn't that be fascinating if he picked Adam? Because the local implication, as you say, Councilman Madison has always been said to have been seeing himself as running for that seat. Other people have also want to run for that seat. The speculation, I would think that Adam would rather win that seat. I also think that he, especially, Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco, who has a column in the Chronicle on Sunday, had said that his former girlfriend, Kamala, Senator Harris, would be better to wait and wait for an AG nod, rather than, he advised her literally on Sunday, don't take the nomination if Joe offers it to you. Hold out for Attorney General. That'll put you in better shape to run for president. I don't think he's right, even though he's Willie Brown, the smartest political guy around. But the suggestions from my editorial board colleagues today after the news came in, they say, one person said, oh, it's going to be Eric Garcetti, who the governor will nominate. And that was an interesting one. And then another cynical person on the editorial board said, no, he would replace a African-American woman with an African-American woman, i.e. Karen Bass. So I'm not sure who's right.
I think the recommendation for Kamala Harris to decline the vice presidential nomination is based largely on the simple statistics that there have been very few vice presidents historically that have gone on to become president. It's apparently more likely that you will attain the highest office in the land going from the springboarding from the attorney general's position. But interesting question. In this time of limited visibility for politicians and for the general community alike, do you see your positions as journalists more important than ever for getting information out to the general public?
Of course we are. That's why the journalism business is making so much money, hand over fist, and why everybody wants to get into journalism, and why the American public trusts journalists so much.
Justin,
I see you laughing there, but there's no comment on that question.
I mean, it absolutely is more critical than ever to have good journalists out there and doing good work and holding those in power accountable. But Larry's absolutely right. The field faces it seems like snowballing challenges that have been around for a while. The financial aspect and the public trust aspect, and I don't know how we're going to turn those aspects around.
This might perhaps be a more personal question, but I'm wondering how you gentlemen feel about the idea that it seems that the vast majority of the public would rather get their information directly from President Trump and his tweets, even while Facebook and in some cases Twitter are actually taking down his posts because of misinformation. When you gentlemen have always worked so hard and been held to such a high standard for fact checking, do you find that to be frustrating?
So I don't know if it's that most Americans want to get or fine with getting their information from the president's tweets, but certainly a solid 40%. We know the 40% are, and so that's the problem. Is we've all gone into our corners. I don't watch television. I watch lots of television. I don't watch the news on television because I'm all day plugged into what's online and to our own news. And when I get my national news that's from broadcast, I get it on NPR. So I don't watch either CNN or Fox. But many people do. And again, we've gone into our corners as far as, interesting, I don't know if they call them Nielsen's anymore, interesting ratings that came out this past week that Fox News in prime time is the #1 rated. More people are watching Fox News than watch any other television in the country. So 30% of the people with a TV on at 8 o'clock at night are watching Fox News. And I can't watch Fox News. I have once or twice, but it's so annoying to me because it's so opinionated. It's like listening to Pacifica Radio. The news is influenced by the politics, and that's not so great for this country.
All right. Okay. I think one of you gentlemen touched on this earlier. There was a recent discussion at a city council meeting concerning police oversight. Unfortunately, there was no conclusive decision that was made. And I'm wondering if you gentlemen have any comments on that, what the general feeling among the populace is as far as that issue is concerned.
Justin, did you watch that meeting? And go ahead.
I've been reading about it. I haven't been able to watch each discussion, but I read that Councilman John Kennedy thinks that 5 votes is attainable for the so-called Tornick-Kennedy proposal, which creates a civilian commission that would, in theory, oversee the police department and work with and also have an auditor that would work under the city manager's office. And then there's also the Hampton proposal that would call for amending the city charter, which would have to go to voters. But the council decided last week, I believe, not to do that because there wasn't enough time to get it together. And his proposal would also have a police oversight commission as well as independent police auditor. But the difference being that the auditor would have subpoena power and also would operate outside the purview of the city manager's office. And so it's probably more politically tenable to achieve the Tornick-Kennedy proposal, but activists are saying that, and Hampton is saying that it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't provide actual oversight. We need subpoena power. We need independence from the city manager's office now and certainly in the future. I tend to lean towards that Hampton's model. I mean, we do need tougher oversight at this time. It's just, I think everyone's in agreement that something needs to be done. And without those two things, the subpoena power and the independence from the city manager's office, I think you're not going to have full credibility from the community's perspective. And this is all about gaining the community's trust. So without some real teeth in the oversight, I think that you're just not going to get it's just not going to be credible in the community's eyes. So there was no city council meeting yesterday, as I recall, but tomorrow the Public Safety Committee is going to be discussing this again, and Kennedy thinks that there might get the 5 needed votes to pass it at council when it comes to council, I think in the next week or two.
Isn't it interesting about how local politics transcends traditional party politics? Nominally, Councilman Hampton was seen as a Republican, conservative business candidate. In some ways, it's completely different. That's a crazy cliche. Tyrone is a very interesting person. He's not traditional Republican in any way, but he's a small business person and understands those issues. So for him to be on the so-called left of this issue is very interesting to me, and it's because it's not a really traditional left-right continuum here. It's about, Tyrone is outraged about some aspects of policing in this country, as so many of us are, as I'm sure Mayor Tornick and Councilman Kennedy would say that they are. It does, as you say, Justin, to the more or less objective observer who's just trying to decide which one of these models would be a better way of doing things efficiently to get the police department with some oversight. Something that Tyrone wants that doesn't go through the city manager is a lot more independent. And if we were in a debating society, you could really make that argument, because why not have some independence there? The longtime view has been within the council, hey, we are elected people. The whole city elects us. This is democracy in action. Don't appoint these independent auditors or inspector general types and pretend that that's a more democratic model. That's true to as far as it goes. It's also true that that's not the only reason we elect city council members. They have other appeals to us, and it's in the last 3 months in this country that we have begun to think about the way that we do our policing more so than we ever have before. But there'll be other issues. There were other issues in the past, and there'll be other issues in the future.
All right. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to point out to our viewers at home again that our program is live this evening if you're watching on Tuesday, August 11th. And if you'd like to call in with questions or comments, you may do so at area code 951-356-6882. That's 951-356-6882. And of course, you can always submit your questions and comments online via email to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. Okay, Larry, Justin, moving on. Another big issue that has been swirling for quite some time, of course, is a financial one. Many people have lost jobs or seen their income significantly reduced. There was some discussion, there was an initial stimulus check, And there has been discussion about a second stimulus check. And of course, in all of this, we've seen the additional benefits that were sent via unemployment suddenly dry up, and continual fighting between the sides at the federal level to determine whether or not they should put those back in place. I'm sure everybody's familiar with all that's going on there. In the meantime, down here, we have seen a lot of people unable to pay their rent, and people are very scared about being evicted from their homes. There had been a period of time where there was a moratorium on evictions that expired. It was renewed, but there is still concern among the general population that people are not going to be able to make their rent. They're not going to be able to make their mortgage. And so far, no one is able to do anything concrete about it. There had been some discussion or questions put to Mayor Tornick, and he said basically that he does not have the authority to place a moratorium on evictions. What do you gentlemen have to say about all of this?
Well, the city council put in some eviction protections last fall. This is before the pandemic. Some others came in during the pandemic on the federal level. The federal level expired last month, and Congress still hasn't been able to agree on that or on the extended unemployment benefits, which I know a lot of people are relying on right now. I read that in Pasadena, the unemployment rate was 16% this past June, and in June 2019, it was just over 4%. We're lower than LA County's unemployment rate, but significantly higher than the national average, which is 10.2%. So I think I think the city would be wise to do everything it can to help its residents and not wait for the federal government to come to get their act together and provide a safety net for people, because people are really struggling, and it could get a lot worse. They've done some good things, and they're starting to do some concerning things, like they approved several $100,000 to continue food programs during the pandemic. The city did, and that's going to become critical as the economic pain continues. But they're also starting to think of reinstituting things like the parking rules and fines. So the pandemic isn't over, and it could get worse. And so I think the city needs to do everything it can to step up its game and be there for Pasadenans.
At the same time, as I don't know, as far as the rent goes, that the mayor isn't right. It may be more of a county-wide issue, as far as doing eviction law. It's a really tough one. If I do believe I hear the complaints of people who maybe own one apartment building, and that's their livelihood too, and they've got a mortgage on that too. It's a rough situation. It's a situation that can be solved by Congress and the president agreeing. If that $600 a month comes back, $600 a week comes back from the feds printing money. The Pasadena can't print money. The state of California can't print money. The federal government prints money, and they've been doing it like nobody's business. And has inflation gone up to, has skyrocketed? No, inflation's exactly where it was before. It's disproving all kinds of things that we learned about economics in college. But this is the real world. And the federal government printing money and sending it to everybody has not caused massive inflation. And it's up to them to prop us up while we weather the pandemic.
Well, now we were looking at the financial hardships that the average citizen is now facing in the wake of this pandemic, and the furloughing or outright loss of jobs, the loss of additional unemployment benefits. But let's take a step back. What about the financial damage being done to cities? In this case, Pasadena. Uh, they've already announced the cancellation of the Rose Parade, which of course brings in a fair amount of money for the city annually. It looks as though, at the very least, the Rose Bowl, uh, the big game, may be on hold. Um, as you were talking about the moratorium on parking fines, that's a massive revenue stream that has also been, at least until now, cut off for the city. At the same time, you have citizens that are asking for increased considerations, additional benefits. What is this doing to the city financially, and how long can they sustain these kinds of losses?
I don't know that the parking fines are as massive a revenue source for City Hall in Pasadena as the Rose Bowl game and the Rose Parade, which is indirect in some cases and direct in terms of hotel tax. And I think the hotel tax is a lot more than the parking fines, even though it annoys each one of us individually when we get a parking ticket. But yes, it is a huge hit to Pasadena and to every other city that has some kind of a tourist draw to not have people coming in. And look at those plucky restaurants down on Raymond Avenue and on Colorado Boulevard trying to get people to come out behind the K-rails and eat on the streets. And my favorite restaurants, the people who I know who run restaurants, it's so amazing to see them still in business and operating as well as they can. It's rough on everybody. It's rough on Pasadena City Hall too, and the real people who work there, trying to do their jobs remotely. It's not easy. But as I said in my column on Sunday, if we did a lockdown, a genuine lockdown in this country for 6 weeks, everyone says to me, why not 3 weeks, or why not 14 days, which is the definition of a quarantine? But I say 6 weeks just to quash the bug. Then we could get back to real life as France has, as sort of Britain has, as New Zealand has 100%, zero transmission. And yet we haven't committed to that. And by doing half measures, we're drawing out the economic pain.
Yeah, Larry's absolutely right. We didn't do it fully correctly the first time around, and now we're paying the price for that. We opened up a little too soon, and now we're going to be on a roller coaster for who knows how long until we get a vaccine, basically. And yeah, Pasadena is going to take a big hit. The people who operate Airbnbs that tourists come into for the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl game. The restaurants, obviously, you drive around Old Town and other parts of the city, and there are a lot more empty storefronts these days. It's a really scary time.
And what is your sense of the situation regarding wearing masks? We've seen in many communities they do wear masks, and then we've seen other communities where there has been a very, very large presence of protesters. So much so that in recent weeks we are starting to see many major metropolitan areas instituting financial recourse for not conforming. That you can be fined for not wearing a mask. What is your sense of how that's working in Pasadena?
When I drove down with my wife down Colorado the other afternoon, late afternoon, and she'd been very down on Pasadena, thinking that people weren't doing a very good job of it. All the people walking in old Pasadena from the western edge of it to the Playhouse District, the only person we saw, and there were a lot of people out shopping, like waiting in line at Tiffany, and I don't know, I guess people really like to shop, so now they can, a little bit. Even if, Sur La Table was gone out of business, all these places in Old Pasadena went out of business. But there was only one person who wasn't wearing a mask, and it was a father, a daughter who was about 10, both wearing masks. And then their little, like 4-year-old, she wasn't wearing one for some reason, even though she wasn't a baby. But so people, I think, are masked up, and I don't think we're Orange County. And so I think people are doing a good job. What about you, Justin?
Well, that's I'm good to hear you say that. When I go on a walk around the block, I definitely see more people than I'm comfortable with not wearing a mask, and we'll have to
Really?
cross the street or or running around the Rose Bowl. I think people think if you're exercising, you don't need it, but I don't think that's true.
No, that's great. That's great because when I run every morning. I don't run around the Rose Bowl, but I run down in the Arroyo, and on my little path, 95% of even the runners are masked up, or at least we're masked up when we
Hmm.
see somebody 100 yards away. There's a few outliers, but yeah, you're right around the Rose Bowl loop. There's some people who are, and a lot of people who aren't. But you can socially, you can separate out. When I see somebody walking on my blocks and they're coming toward me, I just cross the street,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
or walk out in the middle of the street. It's too bad that one of the great bonuses was in April or May was the incredible lack of traffic. You just walk in the middle of the street, um, and it's still down somewhat. And having school being not in session will keep it down, somewhat. It probably won't be permanent gridlock in LA County or on the 210 even. Um, but most people are masked up. Is my experience. You're seeing a lot of people who are.
Well, and we only have so many tools to fight this thing, and it's basically masks and staying 6 feet apart from each other. And so I hope that everyone would take this seriously and do those things. I read that the city, there's a mandate to wear masks in the state, but the city hasn't started issuing citations for not wearing masks or anything like that, and they're thinking about it. And I think they should seriously consider thinking about it, especially if we see another spike and another wave of this. It's like, how long are we going to do this?
Right, and you look at I haven't heard of what we read about in the LA Times that's happening in the Hollywood Hills. I haven't heard of large house parties. I sort of admire Mayor Garcetti in LA for saying that he'd turn off the water and turn off the power. A lot of my libertarian friends are saying that's crazy, and the cops don't want to do it. They say no. The cops are feeling under pressure for a variety of reasons these days. But yeah, they don't want to do it. And I'm sure that the Pasadena Police Department also doesn't want to walk through old Pasadena and issue tickets. I'm hoping that those rangers, whatever they call them in Old Pass, the local guides are handing out masks or mentioning it to people who are maskless. That would be a better approach to me. But if it came to it, I don't have any philosophical objection to finding people. It's an important, very important thing.
Mhm.
All right. Well, switching the topic up ever so slightly. In the days prior to COVID, there had been a lot of discussion about public schools and how a lot of the facilities themselves were languishing due to dwindling resources, especially financially speaking. Then along came COVID, and everyone was forced to basically abandon the buildings and start this remote or distance learning program. Even now, it seems that as the fall semester gets underway, just about all students are still in the distance learning program. I hate to use what's become something of a cliche phrase, but are we looking at the new normal? Is this the solution to the schools that have become dilapidated and the lack of financial resources to repair them? That perhaps we will see students learning in an online arena moving forward, even after a vaccine becomes available?
What do you think, Justin?
I don't know about everyone long term. It's certainly probably the right short term solution. Um, uh, because kids unfortunately can and are contracting the virus and of course spreading it to adults. My mom is a PUSD teacher, and she says that obviously she doesn't want to go back to a classroom full of kids, but she would like the option of being able to teach remotely from her classroom so that she has access to all her materials and things. And she'd also like to see, PUSD providing better technical support and technology training to teachers who aren't as tech savvy as maybe they need to be in this new era. So I think there are things that the school district can do to help mitigate some of the effects of this distance learning.
Well, and it's an interesting idea, Joe, and it kind of calls to mind the idea that what a terrible time it would be to be in the commercial real estate business now for office space. I haven't been in my office more than 20 minutes to turn in a laptop and get a new one in 4 months. That's a crazy new normal in terms of real estate. So we know that the Pasadena Unified School District has incredibly valuable property, and if it sold off all its beautiful campuses, it would have something on the order of $400 million, let's say, and that would last for a couple of years. But the problem is, our daughter's grown up, but how would my wife and I have both worked outside of the house if she had to be at home learning? It doesn't work that way for working families. And I think there will be some things that will be kept from distance learning, but I don't think those speaking for parents, that we don't want it to be all things kept that way. And plus, as a kid, it's fun to get out of the house. I don't know, Justin, I'm curious what your mom has said, and maybe I haven't seen it. I know that the LAUSD, which is starting up next week, they've changed their hours. The teachers in the spring were expected to be online and available, or literally teaching a class from 8 o'clock till 3 or something. Now in the LA schools, it's 9 o'clock because a lot of the kids were sleeping in. So they weren't there at 8 anyway, but 9 o'clock to 2:15. What have you heard from your mom about starting hours in the PUSD?
I don't know the exact hours, but I think it might be something along those lines, some kind of shortening, because it's hard enough to get, a room full of 20, 30 kids to sit still and pay attention when they're sitting in the same room. But when they're all in their own environments with their own personal distractions, it's there, even more challenges placed on teachers.
It has been a nightmare. My Pasadena friend who lives over in the San Rafael Hills, who is the head of the English department at North Hollywood High, Rick Goff, who I had write an op-ed about the online teaching experience in April. I mean, the numbers he saw were about what the whole district reported. You'd have 20, 30% of his students showing up. Of course, they put in the rule saying that you couldn't get a worse grade than you had as of March 14th or whatever the day was, something like that, mid-March. So the kids who had A's, of course, kids who have A's are generally good kids, and they didn't tend to just say, hey, screw you, teacher, I got an A. I'm not doing anything else. Most of them hung in there. But the kids who didn't even care as long as they passed, so kids who had a C and didn't think they were going to do any better than a C, they just would, why show? Was their attitude. It's at the high school level with the older cynical kids. It was really tough to get them to show up. Now, I do understand in the LA schools, they're going to, quote, take attendance beginning next week, as opposed to not. I don't know how that's going to go. I don't know how that goes in terms of the ADA, which is how our schools are funded in California, the average daily attendance. If the kid doesn't show up, the school loses all the money that day. Are they really going to be reporting that to the state and losing all that money? I'm not sure.
There certainly are a lot of unanswered questions where schooling is concerned. Another interesting topic shortly or in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw the minimum wage increase again. And we were discussing restaurants a little bit earlier and how a lot of them were already having difficulties meeting their financial bottom lines. Then enter COVID, and businesses were hit very hard with a reduction in clientele. Most restaurants were only allowed to function for takeout purposes. Very recently, as you mentioned a little earlier, they started adding outdoor dining. But is COVID helping or hurting with this minimum wage increase? You know, certainly we've seen a lot of employees that have been furloughed or laid off. What is your sense of how this is affecting restaurants now?
COVID's hurting them like crazy. And, if you're not in the restaurant business, which I don't think any of us are, and you just like to go out to eat every once in a while, maybe have some friends who run restaurants, you don't think about what a huge factor they are in our economy, especially Pasadena. We often hear the statistic, I don't know if it's really entirely correct, but we have more restaurants per capita than any other city, people say, in the country. Again, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but we have a lot of restaurants, and they employ a lot of people. And they give you the reason to get out to Old Pasadena, as well as many other neighborhoods, as people point out. It's not just Old Pasadena. So they are really hurting the folks who work in them and the folks who own them. It's a rather big part of our economy.
Yeah, it's I don't envy the people who have to figure this out. This is certainly complex and they're one of the hardest hit sectors from all this financial strife that's been happening from the pandemic. I certainly support the minimum wage and minimum wage increase, and it's always tricky with restaurants. So it was tricky before the pandemic, and it's certainly more difficult now that so many are struggling to survive. So I don't know what the answer is there.
And the reason that so many of our Pasadena restaurant owners, both of liberal and conservative political stripes on other issues, bridle at some of the minimum wage things for their workers is the wait staff can make tremendous amounts of money, as we know from tips. At the fancier restaurants, you buy $100 bottle of wine, and that your server is getting 20% added onto that just from that bottle. Not that I buy any $100 bottles of wine in restaurants, but it's it's the back of the house. It's the people who are cooking and the people who aren't getting tips who are, it's just hard to meet your net, as many of our restaurant owners will say. And I certainly support the rising minimum wage, but I also hear folks who talk about their economic struggles as owners as well.
Well, in recent weeks, we've seen communities moving to make outdoor dining a real possibility for many of the restaurant businesses in their cities, Pasadena being no exception. And this is obviously intended to help these struggling businesses remain afloat. It also has been suggested that it helps to give people a feeling of community again, and perhaps not feel so trapped. But as you gentlemen have also noted, the flip side to that is we're bringing people back out and putting them in closer proximity. So is this outdoor dining a good thing? Is it hurting our chances of making a speedy recovery from COVID? And do you see this concept remaining around after COVID?
I don't know how long it will last after COVID. Maybe if they're set up in a way that they can do it well. I personally, my wife and I wouldn't go out to an outdoor restaurant at this point in the pandemic. She has underlying health conditions. So do our parents. We just can't take that risk right now. I certainly understand the economic need, and I certainly understand the need for community that you mentioned. And so if you're in a position to be able to go and support those businesses, and then that's a good thing. But not all of us can do that right now.
I do think, Joe, that it's going to permanently change. I think that people are never going to be comfortable for the rest of our lifetimes in the same way that they were being in crowds or being in crowded restaurants even. So the story in the New York Times today about the huge change that many people in New York think it will bring. There's whole 70 miles of New York City streets have been closed down block by block with restaurant space out there and seating out there. And I think that, of course, I was the one who was lobbying to close down Colorado Boulevard in Old Pasadena. That's the only way to easily socially distance, not to just have these little air intrusions into the turning lane, which is what they've got with their half measures. But yes, I think that it's going to, and in New York City, it's fine to do it in August, although it's a little sweltering. But you can't do it in January. Here in Pasadena, you can have outdoor dining 12 months of the year, and the very few nights of the year it will rain. Then you put up an umbrella. So yeah, I think people are going to be comfortable with that more comfortable with that option for years and years to come.
Yeah, I'd love to see the Colorado Boulevard shutdown idea take place. There was some early energy for that, and I don't know if that's still going. So I'd love to see that happen.
No, they rejected the Wilson plan.
We have only about a minute left, and there was one other quick question I really wanted to address, and that is with so many people having difficulties now making rent or paying their mortgages, and so many people that are out of work, is this going to put the topic of affordable housing more front and center with the city council? Do you think that's going to happen soon?
I sure hope so. It's not affordable to live in Pasadena or Los Angeles, most parts of Los Angeles, and getting less and less affordable all the time, especially with the pandemic. So we're going to start seeing a mass exodus of people if more affordable housing isn't made available.
And yes, Joe, absolutely. I completely agree with Justin. And I also would look forward to seeing if what might happen really does happen. If all that office space we're not going to need anymore when we're all working from home becomes housing. So whether it's downtown LA or if it's downtown Pasadena, up and down Lake Avenue, some of the empty office spaces, if that were to go to housing, that would completely change the supply, which would change the price.
All right. Well, I thank you very much. I'm afraid we have just about run out of time, but hopefully that will be converted into affordable housing. Again, Mr. Larry Wilson and Mr. Justin Chapman, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I truly do appreciate your insights on all of the topics we've discussed tonight. For our viewers at home, if there are topics that you'd like to see addressed in our discussions, you can email them to us at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Till then, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thanks for watching and have a great night.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.